80% of your work by then, chances are you're not going to meet your deadline. Okay, I've got my little spaceship. I animated it flying in. It's going to go through pillars and crash land. That's about it. And here's my little pillar. There's a little fracture script in Lab PC 16. I recommend you use it, otherwise you're going to have to, if you're going to break any objects in the scene, it's going to take you forever just to break it. Under your software scripts, fracture scripts, you just copy that one, go to your C drive at home, program files, Autodesk, 3D Max 2014, scripts folder, and put it in your starter. And every time Max starts up, it will start up with your script. If you need any scripts for almost anything you can think of, whether it's to generate rocks or bricks along a wall or whatever you might need it to do, go to scriptspot.com, select what program you want it for, and type in a keyword, and it will find anything related to that keyword. Okay. So let's go and fracture our little pillar. I'm going to go 0, 0, 1. And now all you have to do is, once the script is run, pick object. You'll notice it says pick pillar 0, 0, 1. And you can set the amount of parts you want to break it to, so 25. And then just click break. And it's broken your little pillar to pieces for you, which will make life easier. And now all we have to do is just duplicate this one and do a test. So I want to move it over. So let's just shift it a little bit over so you can actually connect there. Hold shift, duplicate it. We're only going to do 2 for now. Okay. I'm going to just assign the same material to all of it and the same wireframe color, so there's less confusion. Okay. First, this tab on the left, you won't have it. So if you right click over here, it'll be like this at home, or here. Just right click it and say Mass Effects toolbar. You can see there's containers, animation layers. You can put everything onto your, if you only have one screen, I don't recommend it, but you can turn on your Mass Effects. Let me just switch it over to there so it's less. You can put it anywhere you want. Nah, stop putting it on the top. It's fine there. Okay, now I'm going to close my fracture scripts because I already fractured the object I want. The first one is, like anything else, it's your animation, your physics tab where it's got your globals, your baking out your keyframes, your object selection and adjustment tab, and then it's got your rigid bodies. These are just your settings. If you want to adjust certain objects, you can. Okay, you can close that for now. First thing is, this object's an animated object, but I would like it at some point to become physics, so it will hit the pillars and then just slide along the floor or bounce to the moon, whichever it decides to do. Underneath here is the rigid body, so you can add in a dynamic rigid body, which means those are the pillars. That means that the moment something hits them, they're going to break apart, fall apart, whatever they do. Kinematic means it's an animated rigid body, and static is exactly what it says, it's a static rigid body. So we're going to make our ship a kinematic because that's an animated one. So just add on it. At the moment it won't, it will just follow the animation, and we're going to leave it like that for now. Let's grab our pillars and set those to be dynamic. The first problem we're going to have is the pillars are going to start falling apart the instance I actually start baking it. So I'm going to go to my simulation tool tab, click make all, and just wait for it to patiently do its thing. As you can see, they fall apart, and you don't really want that, so unbake all again, grab your pillars. You need to start it in sleep mode. So basically, if the object's asleep, the moment it wakes up is the moment the ship hits it and it collapses, and that will wake it up. So you need to go to your multi-object editor, start in sleep mode, and let's do another test. Click bake all, and now the moment the ship hits it, it will collapse. Okay, and now we're going to set the ship. I'm going to unbake it again. I want the ship to actually be part of the physics process. So on your kinematic object down here, it says kinematic and says until frame. So what it's asking you is, at what frame do you want the physics to take over? So I've rendered it up to 50, so I'm going to say from about 45. After frame 45, it will become a dynamic object and not animated anymore. So then you do that test again and you bake it. And you can see it doesn't have much momentum, so it just drops. Boom. So we'll leave it like that. We'll just give it more momentum later. So unbake it again, and let's go duplicate a couple more pillars. Hold shift, drag them along, 4, and see how far the ship goes into it. That's fine. And now let's do another test before doing anything else and see if the bounce is fine, see if everything else is fine. Bring up your tab. You don't have to close this. I just closed it because of space reasons. And just click Bake All again. Okay, so let's play that out and see what it looks like. Sometimes you won't get real-time playback in your viewport. It's actually not too bad. It's a little bit too bouncy, the ship. Just play it through and see what it looks like. Okay. So now we're going to adjust a few settings. Unbake all. I'm going to grab these pillars and give them a little bit more weight. So go to your multi-object exporter and start adjusting. You can go down to cardboard, concrete, whatever you want. I'm just going to set it manually. Density means how heavy the object is and how much power it will take to take it down. So I'm going to set it to about 8. At the moment set to 0.5. I don't want it to be as bouncy, so I'm going to set it to about 0.1. And friction wise, static friction means is how much friction will it gain from an static rigid body, and how much friction will it gain from a dynamic rigid body. So you got static controls and dynamic controls. So I'm going to set it to 0.2 on both. See what that does. Grab my ship. I don't want that baby to bounce, so I'm going to just set it to about 0.02. Depending on your scene, these numbers might go higher or lower, once again, depending how realistic and scale-wise your scene is. And I'm going to give this ship a little bit more density, so I'm going to set it to about 5 as well, and play it out and see what it looks like. This is a lot back and forth. Bake it, see what it looks like, try it out. I think I might have made it a little too dense, but it's fine. But play it, it's fine. It's a good exercise. I might want to start it from sooner. So what I'm going to do is unbake all, and in the kinematic, instead of starting it at frame 45, I want the animation to only last until frame 40. And I can see I'm not getting enough momentum on the ship, so I'm going to animate it manually further back. So make sure when you animate you're on local, because if you notice in the viewport, it's not following the ship, the pivot. So just switch it to local, and it will follow it. So at least you know you're moving the ship only. So I'm going to move it quite far back, do a test speed, and then bake it out again. Now it's going to start at frame 40, adding keyframes and making it dynamic. Now that we've added more speed to the ship, it should slide a lot longer. It might start too late, so I'm going to set it back to 45 again and see what that looks like, because I think it's picking up too much momentum from the actual motion. It's a lot of back and forward. That's better. As you can see, there was a bit too much bounce in that one shot. One of the pieces made it shoot to the moon. There we go. So we're going to just adjust once again a few more settings. Let's give it a bit more weight. So I'm going to set it to 8. I'm going to literally kill the bounce and see what happens, and set it to 0.2 on the friction. Just go play back and forward until you get a decent result. It's just a lot of back, forward, and now the other side bounce like that. We are going to leave it because otherwise we can sit here forever tweaking everything. And another thing I want is I don't want all the pieces to fly off. So let's say this is inside a room. I want some of the top pieces and the bottom pieces to stay behind. So just play your animation through. I'm going to keep those up here. Grab a few of the bottom ones here. Bring it through. Grab a few of the top ones again. Just grab those top ones over there. Grab this bottom one. Just play it through and see. Okay, more of the top, less of the bottom. And I'm just going to make sure that they stay to the ceiling if there is a ceiling or whatever I decided to do. And just grab a few of the top ones. Just go to your multiple object editor and just switch it to static. And then play it out and see what it looks like. So those will stay behind, like they didn't actually break at all. So play it through. Okay. The momentum might be a little bit too fast, so I'm just going to adjust the speed again, and then I think that'll be enough for exercise reasons. And then let's go. I wish they would fix that viewport issue, but we'll go with it. I'm just going to bring it a little bit inner, bake it all, and this will be the final one. And then we'll add some particles for the thrusters. Let's just play it through one time. Okay, that's fine. Let's add a floor and a light and all that other snazzy stuff. I'm just going to add a plane for the floor, nothing special. If you're going to do your scene, you're animating a character, please don't bother spending all the time in the world modeling everything in the scene if all you're going to get graded on is animation. But if he jumps over a box, add a box in. It's not going to kill you to make just a box and say that's a table. No, it's not. that difficult to make a table. Let's just adjust the size because it's a bit big. And I'm going to add a gray shader again. Just going to create a daylight system. It literally tries to emulate daylight as best as possible. V-Ray's got one, Max has got one, Mental Ray's got one, Softimage, all of them have their little mock versions. Switch it to Mental Ray. I'm going to switch it to manual so I can place the light where I want it. Get down a little bit. Now I'm going to create a camera. So I want it, let's see how it plays out. Let's see what it plays towards camera. Slide past. Let's have it wipe out camera. I'm going to press Ctrl C to create a camera. There we go. Just play it through and see if it looks okay. Just there we go. Okay, that's perfect. Now we're going to add little thrusters. There's multiple particles in Max, like there always is. I'm going to hide everything else but the ship. Most of the particles in Max, besides the Fume Effects, which is a plugin, are very simple old school particles. To create them, you go to Create tab, you go to Geometry. I don't know why they put it under Geometry, but it's Particle Systems, and there's the PF Source, which is the complicated one. I'm not going to run through that now. It'll take too much time. This is a node-based particle system. As you can see, it just emits downwards. It starts off with a PF Source, which is literally the object in the scene. It's got what it's going to render, and you say render geometry or bounding boxes or phantoms or whatever you might have needed to do. It's got birth rate, it's got position icon, speed, rotation, shape, and display. Okay, and that is your PF Source. It's more of the modern version of actually doing it. Problem is, it can also kill your machine if your machine's old. And now we're going to create a sprayer. This literally is for rain. So if you watch it, there we go. All of these take some tweaking to make it look decent, like everything else. There's snow. And there is super spray, which is what we're going to use for the thrusters. It literally shoots particles from one point. Okay, so we're going to leave that one because we're going to use it. And then we got the blizzard. It's the same as the snow, just a lot quicker. All of these require textures, everything to make it look decent. All these particle systems give you is the movement of the object. A P-array means that you'll be able to emit particles from an object, not from that. So let's say I wanted my whole ship to be on fire. It'll emit particles from that ship. Okay. And then you got the PC cloud, which literally means it makes clouds. You'll usually use this with either images of clouds or afterburn or fume effects to get decent clouds. Okay, and these don't move. You can see the particles hardly move, if not very little. Okay, so we're going to use this little super sprayer. Call it engine particle, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to align it to my ship. Rotation, position, and everything to the pivot. Just rotate it in the right direction. And then shift it back. Do one at a time because they're both going to be roughly the same unless you want them to have separate timing. It's fine. And then link it to your ship, otherwise it won't follow it. And see what it plays out like. There we go. First we need to fix it is how many particles there actually is. There's not enough. And that they're all spraying perfectly out in a line. So you go to your modifier and you got off axis. Off axis means it will spray it that way in any direction. And let's say you want to offset it. So it'll literally offset the spray out of the corner instead of straight on. Spread will spread them across, as you can see, flatten the plane. Then you got the off plane, which will adjust it. And then you got your spread. Just play around with your spreads. They will be more than enough. And just play it through and see if it looks okay. Looks fine. And now, by default, it's set to ticks in the viewport. That means no matter what you do, it'll always look like a tick. Or you can pick a dot, so you can see dots. I'm going to pick mesh, so you can actually see the meshes. And I'm going to set the viewport density of the particles to 100% instead of 10%. The reason why it's set to 10% is because Sometimes you're going to go into the millions, and as it is, the machine will die. So just try to limit the amount of dying. So you'll set it maybe 10%, between 1 and 10%. That's how many particles you'll see on the viewport. So now we're going to go to our little particle generation tab. What it does by default, it says it's using a rate of 10 particles. That means every time 10 particles are born, another 10 are born. So what we're going to do is set it to a total amount of particles. So we're going to set it to about 500. See if that's enough, because we're still going to scale it up. So I'm not too worried about how little they look like. And play it through. That's fine. And now we're going to adjust the speed of the particles. That means how fast is this shooting it out of the particle system. I'm going to set it to about 2. And then you have to adjust the spread. Because of the speeds changing, everything else has to adjust. Set. There we go. And just play it through. And don't worry about too much of the speed, because it's getting also momentum from the ship moving. And then you can switch the variation of speed. I like to set it to 25% for most things, because not everything moves identically. And what it's doing right now is the particles will start at 0 and end at 30. That means at frame 30, no more particles are being emitted. The ones that we are looking at are the leftover ones. Okay, if you want that to stay for longer, go for it, but I'm going to leave it at stop frame 30. Display until means how long the particles will be seen on screen. Leave it for the full length of your active time segment. And life means each particle will live for exactly 30 frames. I'm going to set that to about 15, because you don't need them to live for long. Okay, maybe 15 is too little. Try 25. Once again, it's back and forward and seeing what actually looks good. Bring it back. Actually, not too bad. And now we're going to set the variation of the life as well by 25%. So not all of them live and die the same. And now you got your size. Now we're going to play with the size. At the moment, it should be triangles, as you can see. I'm going to set it to, let's try size 30. And now I'm going to also do variation again. So you don't want them to all be the same size once again. Now, grow for. That means a particle will come from existence to existence in 10 frames. So they will literally scale up from nothing to 10 frames. If I kill it, as you can see, they're a lot smaller there. If I make it 0, they're all going to be the same size from beginning to end. So I'm going to set that, instead of 10, I want it to fade out for 5, so it just dies off quicker. As you can see, particles just scale out and die off. And then you can go to particle type. There are 3 types of particles. You've got the standard particles, which have your triangle, which is what we see right now. Then you've got cube, special. Special are used for gaming, because in the old days you used to be able to put a tree on 2 planes and that would be your tree. Nowadays you can actually afford to model a tree. Back then you used to put it on 2 planes. Now for particles you still use 3 planes to put on smoke or dust. So no matter which way the camera looks at it, they're always seeing something. So it doesn't disappear out of the blue. Then you got your facing, which is still used for cheaper systems. Or for the iPad, you don't ever use the constant for the iPad. I mean the facing, you generally just use the special facing. Then you got your constant, which is exactly the same as your facing. Then you got your tetra, which are little triangles. You got your 6 points. As you can see, it does 6 points. Spheres. We're going to use spheres. Let's see what they look like. Fine. And just play it out and see what it looks like. I want them to die a little bit sooner, because I think they stay alive for a little bit too long. So what I'm going to do is go and make sure the life duration is set to about 15 and see if that will fix some of the issues. That's better. And then you go back to your particle, and we're going to go through a few more settings. Then you got your metaparticles, which I'll run through now, and instance geometry. So if you wanted this super spray to shoot out teddy bears, you just pick instant geometry and you pick a teddy bear. And it'll throw teddy bears all over the screen. I don't know why, but if you wanted to. Then you go rotation and collision. This will control the rotation of your object. So at the moment, each particle is spinning over 30 frames. So if you want to control that, you say, okay, I want it to only spin over 15 frames. You'll notice that now they will spin a little bit less. Because some things you don't want to spin, like when it's raining, you don't want the droplets to spin. You want them to go down. So you can switch the variation up as well, 25%. I'm not going to play with the phase, because I don't want to adjust the degree and phase or variation on it. How you would do rain even to this day, even with RealFlow, because RealFlow is a proper fluid dynamic simulator, and it's a program that's actually very decent. You would fake it by putting cubes or spheres, and then you'd stretch it. So you'd notice they're actually stretched. So you'd fake the rain by stretching the particle to give it the illusion that there's actually motion blur and movement. I'm going to switch it to nothing. And you can also set it to user defined, so you can stretch it in any direction you want. But for now, leave it to random. Now, I'm not going to turn on interparticle collisions. Actually, let's try. I'm too afraid now because it might just... Yeah, I was afraid of that. Problem with interparticle collisions, it means that every single particle has to affect the other particle. So you need a decent machine, and hopefully it doesn't die. And this is, yeah, you don't turn it on unless you really, really, really need to. Because unfortunately, it will die. So I'm going to just turn it off quickly while I've got a chance. It literally makes each particle push the other particle apart. Don't do it unless you need to. Okay. Object motion inheritance means how much each object will inherit the motion from every other object, every other particle, how much it influences each other. At the moment it's set to 100. You can set it down to 50, whatever you need. As you can see, it impacted the particles instantly in the viewport. If you set it to 100, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to set it to whatever, 50. Let's go with 50. And then multiplier, no, variation 25%, that's fine. And then bubble motion literally means if you've got little dust particles in the air and you don't want them to be moving too much, but you don't want them to be too static, you just give them a little bubble motion. So it's literally putting a noise in the particle. So they hover a little bit. So they just look like they're sitting in the air, but they're not absolutely static. You got particle spawn. This is cool, except I think I'm going to kill the machine again. You've got 3 different choices. You can go back there. I don't know why it keeps... You can die after collision. So if you want a particle to die after collision, you click die after collision, which is the easy one because killing particles is the easy part. Spawn and collision. So that means if you wanted rain to come down, and the moment that particle hits the floor, it will spray more particles. You create it on spawn and collision. And you can also have spawn on death. So the moment one particle dies, another one spawns. And then you also can spawn trails, which I don't want to do that because that means every single particle will spawn trails. And it's just going to, this machine's just going to die. Okay. Particles are heavy on machines, no matter which machine you have. Just be very careful. If you can, get Krakatoa if you're really insistent on doing particles. Because what Krakatoa does is takes Max's particles, and let's say you only have to do 50,000 in the viewport, and this comes down to hard drive space and RAM. If you've got enough hard drive space, it will use up 150 gigs to create a couple of million more particles, and it stores it onto memory. So just make sure you've got a very big hard drive space before you play around with Krakatoa. And that is about it. Then you got your presets at the bottom. Load presets, you got bubble, fireworks, hose, shockwave, trail, welding sparks, whatever you needed to do. Okay. Now I'm just going to duplicate it over. It's already linked. And then let's go from the camera and see what it looks like and unhide all. I'm just going to delete in my, what it does is it leaves behind the original meshes that we cut up. Which should be there. There we go. We just have to delete them. They leave them there just in case you change your mind and you want the originals. There we go. That will be our final shot. Wait, except for my particle system, because I didn't use local, is offset. So let's go and set it back into place. Just place it. There we go. And what I would do if I was going to use these balls is I would just put a smoke effect onto the ball and render it out with alpha, and you'd get a decent looking smoke. Just in case you're wondering where the smoke effect is, click on your texture, go to any material. In this case I'm going to, let's grab that material, and you click on your diffuse, and there's literally a smoke over there. You apply it, and then you'll have to render it to test out scaling. Okay. Then you play it through. Okay, and now let's go to soft bodies. This machine is okay. Reset, reset, reset. Oh my soul. Okay, when in doubt, Control Alt Delete. This machine is so broken. If your Mac starts up and there's DLL issues, just rather uninstall and reinstall it. Because this machine's got so many DLL issues, I'm surprised it's actually functioning. Yeah, we know. Okay, I'm just going to close everything, and now let's go and create a little bouncing ball or whatever we need. Set it to the center of the world. Mass Effect uses the grid floor as the floor, so just move everything up. And now we're going to add a soft body. So instead of adding a rigid body this time, we're going to go straight to what looks like a t-shirt and add a soft body. The cool thing about the soft bodies is it's got a live drag option. What that means is you can view it in the viewport and see what your soft body is actually looking like. The easiest way is just to show you. And you can see it. So you can actually just grab any vert and fling it around or move it. So you can actually see if your character was running through the scene and he hit it, how far would it be impacted by the hit, and would it work? And drag it around. This is new to Max 2014. 2013 was the first time that it included it, so it's cool. Okay, so now you leave it on, and we're going to run through a few more settings. There's gravity, so please don't play around with the gravity, but if you really wanted to, it will break everything. So set it to, go to 2. Already the ball's getting squashed. Go to 3, then go to 10. Now it's flattened. Go 50. And that's like, I'm dying. So set it back to 1 again. Okay. Density. What density does is how heavy the object actually is. So it might not affect the actual squishy of the ball. So let's say I'm setting it to 1000. But if you play around with your mouse and you actually grab the ball, it takes a lot more effort on you with the mouse to throw this thing around. Hey, come back. Okay, so just turn it back on. I'm going to set it back to the default 50. Stretchiness is exactly what it says it does. If you make it stretchy, it will stretch more, so you can inflate it more. I wouldn't set it too high, so I'm going to set it to about 0.1. As you can see, it's already making it a lot. Maybe 0.1 is too high, 0.02. And now you can, bendiness will make it more like cloth. So if you set it to 1, now it's more like cloth. So if you're going to use this for your cloth, you can. But let's set it to 0.5 for this case. It's a pathetic balloon. And now you've got enable balloon behavior. This is awesome because you can inflate it. All these sliders are animatable. The balloon behavior is actually pretty cool. You turn it on, it starts off deflated. Then you switch it up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then eventually if you had a tear in it, it would explode. But then you get it deflated. Then you switch it back to 2. It'll come back down the line. There we go. Okay. Now self collisions means how thick is your object. So when it collides, so if you see the object going through itself, just up the thickness of your self collision. Now if you see the object going through another object, let's say a rigid body, it has to do with colliding with rigid body thickness. Now understand, it's not always the fault of the thickness. Sometimes if this, in this case, this sphere is very low poly for purposes of using cloth or soft bodies. Okay, so just remember that. Okay, so what you have to do is maybe up the quality, and sometimes you can't avoid interpenetrations. If you play Assassin's Creed, no matter how much fabric they use on these clothes, it still goes through the leg at points because there's not enough geometry in it, and they can't afford to have that much geometry. Okay, attaching to colliders is exactly what it says. If you've got a strap on your character and you want it to dangle around but still follow the character, he's a rigid body, so you'll attach it to him. Okay, and how much it influences it, and how much and you can also break it, so it detaches past a certain point, will break. The same as a allow tearing. The best way to tear it is grab verts that you want it to tear along, and then what it says, once you turn it on, and you inflate the balloon, once it goes past 1.5, it will blow up. It will tear and break. Okay, you can also tear along the normals. Don't weld. If you don't have two meshes that are welded together, it'll tear along there. And this is the most important. A lot of fabric has a tendency of overstretching. The only way to fix that is to make it a little bit more like jean material rather than silk, because then it won't stretch as much. But cool thing about M-Cloth is it's got the anti-stretch option, so it won't stretch that much. Okay, if you've got a decent machine, please turn on hardware acceleration. Why not? It'll speed up the whole process. And now we're going to do our little test. Let's save our file. Always save, because unfortunately, like rigging, particles like crashing everything. Okay. Now we're just going to animate the ball, so I'm going to bring it down here and then animate it from quite high up. See, that's fine. And now we're going to make it a dynamic rigid, a kinematic rigid body. So you'll notice it says dynamic, just switch it to kinematic and say, maybe at about frame 30, I want the animation to stop and I want the ball to actually hit the floor. So I'm going to say frame 30, bring up your tab and start and bake it all. Now, it did. But if you want it to be more bouncy, it's easy as simple as going, let's make it less like cloth and more like a ball. So I'm going to switch the, let's say, bendiness to 0.1. And stretchiness, I'm going to set it to 0. And let's try to do another test. Nope, still too bendy. And let's just zero it out. There we go. And bake it all. If you wanted to keep the momentum going longer, just switch the dynamic to, let's say, instead of being dynamic from frame 30, try 40. You see how that goes. And once again, it all comes down to speed. If you're not happy with it, just go and animate the start frame to be a lot higher. So the moment it hits the floor, we'll start at 35 this time. Leave it on the side view. There we go. It's too dense at the moment, so you might just want to make it density less, because at the moment it's just really too heavy. So switch it to 20. And then just make all of it. Oh, geez. Here's the default with the stupid M physics is it will automatically go back to dynamic. I don't know why you have to keep switching to kinematic. It's stupid. There we go. And there's our little ball dancing around. And now we're going to run through normal cloth and also M cloth, but for different purposes. Let's just save. If you're going to do cloth, there's two ways to do it, luckily enough, because sometimes both of them drive me insane, so at least I have two options. Let's create a sphere. Once again, keep it above the ground because M cloth uses the floor as a collision object, so that'll be fine. And unlike with cloth, keep your low poly mesh. Let's say you got a t-shirt, but always duplicate it and call it for cloth simulation purposes, and then you have to make it quite high in density in order for it to react. I'm not going to go that high because we're going to sit here forever trying to calculate it. So I'm going to set it to about 500, and then I need about 50 rows of detail, maybe a little bit more, but we'll see how it goes for now. Just keep it above the ball so at least it drops onto the ball. Now we're going to grab that one and add a cloth modifier to it. So click on cloth, open your object properties. Just add your sphere in as well as a collision object. Both of them are inactive at the moment. So that means that cloth will do nothing. So go to your plane, turn it into a cloth, go to your sphere, go to the bottom and turn it into a collision object. Just make sure that it's actually happened. And I'm going to use a preset of Burlap. There we go. And now we're going to simulate. Next to where it's got a little tick and says progress, just don't simulate local, don't simulate dampen, just simulate, and that will work for you. What happened back there, it encountered a collision it didn't like and then snapped back up to try and rectify it. At the moment, the fabric will go through itself for speed purposes, and most of the time when you're testing, that's not an issue because you want to see what the fabric moves like and you don't want to spend 10 years trying to simulate it. But that's okay. And then always erase simulation unless it's the final one. Turn on self collision. Also turn on check intersections. Because if you're going to turn on self collision, you might as well turn on check intersections to avoid, so it gives you the error when it happens. Now the 0 next to self collision means if it's, let's say frame 20, the fabric really goes through each other and it's having a problem solving that problem, the more iterations you give it. So if you set it to 2, it'll try to solve the problem twice. If it doesn't, it'll carry on. If you set it to 20, it'll try to give it 20 tries before it moves on. So in this case, I'm going to leave it at 0, otherwise we will be here forever. Click simulate. Now it will collide with itself. As you can see, it really has an issue back there in that one frame. But it seems to work out and carry on. And you can still see the fabric is still not high res enough to use as a final product. My best advice, even if you're going to do pre-rendered, use cloth for what you need cloth to be used for. And even if it's closed, more of a tight fabric, don't worry about using cloth because it can cause a lot of headaches. There we go. And that's your cloth. Okay. And that's one method to doing cloth. Let's say you want, I'm going to erase my simulation again. This will happen occasionally. So just remove the cloth because it will break because of the likes breaking. Just add the cloth back in again, make sure it's cloth, burlap, whatever you want it to be. Just make sure the collision's collision, the cloth is cloth, burlap, click OK. Now let's say you want to anchor a piece, the corner for example, drag it open, click group. In this case, let's go to the top viewport, grab just the corner. Sorry, actually grab the corner or whatever you want it to be. Let's actually grab this whole edge over here. And now we're going to make this stay behind and the rest can go. So you're going to create a group, call it anchor. At the moment it's assigned to nothing. As you can see, there's a lot of things you can assign it to. Node, surface, cloth, preserve, drag, whatever you need to collide it or attach it to, you can. I'm just going to say preserve it because you want to preserve where it is. It's not going to do anything else but fall down. So you click simulate and that will stay behind, the rest will move. You'll use a lot of these nodes and surface controls to get pockets to stick, to get anything else to stick to your object. And now we'll just see what it looks like, play it through. There we go. That's one method of doing cloth. The other method is using mcloth again. So what I'm going to do for this exercise is just make the ball a rigid. So make it rigid static. Grab the cloth, make it a cloth. And let's just do a straightforward test, see what it looks like straight off the bat. It's going to be very rubber-like because it's set to the same settings as the ball before. So it will fold, but it's going to be more of a thicker fabric. So just let it go. I might have to reduce the amount of detail. No, it actually seems to be going okay. This one takes a lot longer to calculate because it's mainly used for the gaming stuff, so it's not used to the high poly counts. And you can really see how it's bubbling. It's a lot thicker. It will crease less, and it already does self collision. So at least that's the bonus. What it's doing now is because it's dropped, it's trying to settle back down. So just give it a few more frames. And it will settle down. Sometimes before you even start your animation, you might need 200 frames to simulate everything from your hair to your fabric before you even start animating. That's enough to see. I'm just going to cancel it there and see what it looks like. Yeah, we're going to make it bend a little bit more. So we're going to unbake everything again. Go down here and I'm going to set the bendiness to about let's try 0.7. And let's make the stretchy 0.01 because we know that makes it a little bit crazy. And I'm going to make the density a little bit less. And let's bake all again. This is a back and forth. Once you've got a decent fabric and you think that looks like cotton, please make yourself presets so you never have to do this again. And that's why I always say, once you start doing character work or whatever it might be, stick to one unit setup and remind yourself that you always have to stick that unit setup so you can actually always use your presets that you've made. And let it sit. This is the only tiresome part of doing particles and stuff, is you have to wait for it to simulate a lot of the time, or you have to wait for a lot of the time for the machine to catch up. So don't enter 10,000 and hope it can handle it. It's almost done. Sometimes I give myself 200 frames and see at what stage does the fabric actually sit down and settle. It's actually not too bad. So I'm going to unbake it now. And I'm going to move the ball at about, it looked like at frame 50 we can move it. So I'm going to set a dead keyframe and then I'm just going to move it along. Move it up. So that once the fabric, see, I made the common mistake, sorry. Actually go to the frame and move it up. Now, once it settles, it will bring the fabric with it. Now, we need to switch this from a static rigid body to a kinematic rigid body. Otherwise, the fabric's not going to do anything. So on your static, switch it to kinematic so it knows it's an animated object, and just bake it again and let it do its thing. If you're going to do a character, let's say he's got a body underneath, always shrink the body a little bit so you have less issues with the cloth colliding with it. Rather push out the distance of collision than actually having to fight it, because the cloth does not like colliding with itself and it will crash constantly. So just shrink your body down even if it's unrealistically underneath as a collider. That's quite heavy flavor. And done. Yeah. And the reason why it's still going through the object is obviously there's not enough detail, and that sphere has not enough detail, and this object's way too heavy. There's a lot of issues, but not the end of the world and not that terribly hard to fix. Okay, and that is cloth number 2. Now, if you're going to do anything fluid related in Max, like let's say water, or please don't do anything fine like sprays of water. Anything, just stick to simple muds and blood splattering. Use RealFlow for everything else. RealFlow is another program. I recommend you start using it and learning it because every other company out there uses it. I know Blender has their own fluid simulations, and I know you're going to use Blender for next year, but please force yourself to learn other 3D packages. Because nothing's worse than you leave here and they go, cool, that's cute, we use Maya. And you go from a program that had everything to a program that has modeling, muscle system, texturing, rigging, and no fluids. Okay, so you just have to get used to learning multiple programs. So learn RealFlow, which comes with Real Wave, and now it comes with Real Sand, which does decent sand particles and everything. So just get used to learning multiple programs. That's the key here. And I'm going to set this to 500 and 550. We're just going to spray some whatever it's going to be onto the floor. Luckily enough for particles, we don't need any detail on this floor. It will collide with the surface, and that's about it. We're going to use a super spray again. So we're going to go particle system, super sprayer. I'm going to create it at the corner here. Have it shoot the particles inwards. So I'm just going to rotate it inwards. Let's see how it's going. Go. Now we need to give it gravity, and we need it to hit this floor. So first thing we include is gravity. Fluid. You can push it, if depending on the quality of your machine, you can push the fluids max quite far. This one's actually pretty decent. To create any gravity, wind, whatever you needed, go to what looks like 3 little waves. They're called space warps. There's a push which literally does what it says. It pushes your particles around. Motor is for if you got smoke running through a vent, and then there's a engine that starts sucking it. That motor will affect it when it reaches that point. Vortex does what it does. It creates vortexes, twisters, whatever you need it to do. Drag is actually very underutilized, and I use it a lot. If you're going to create wispy cigarette smoke, and you use the super spray to emit it, it'll just emit up. If you want it to be wispy, you put a drag on the other side. What a drag does is it forces the particles towards it. And then once it goes past that point, it will straighten out again. So the more drag you have, the more your particles will perform the way you want it to. P-bomb just explodes your particles outwards. Path follow makes your particles follow a path. Gravity does what it says. It pulls the particles down, which is exactly what we're going to do now, is add a gravity. You can add a wind. I'm just going to add a gravity for now. And now we need a collider. Because if we grab the particle, in order for the particle to be affected by any space warp in the scene, there's a little icon up here where it's got a link chain and the space warp icon. It says bind to space warp. Start from your particle, left click. You'll see a little dotted line, the same as linking, and link it to your particle. You'll notice now it's shooting down. The gravity might be a bit much, so you can always go up to your gravity and set it down to about 0.8. You'll get real-time feedback, so please don't go too crazy, because this thing will die eventually. Now let's go and create a deflector. Under your forces tab, go to deflectors. You got a P Omni deflector. All of these deflect Omni. What Omni means in Max is that it will shoot it outwards from the object. It will, so you can hit a sphere with it. P, S, and U all determine on how they react to the surface, but they all do the same thing. Okay, I'm going to use a U deflector because it exactly does what it says. It's going to come from the top, bounce off the floor, and bounce out. That's all I really need a deflector to do. Okay, so I'm going to select my floor. In this case, it asks you what is the floor. You pick the object, and now we're going to get a few bounces probably because it's set to 100%. Oh wait, don't forget to link your particle again to your deflector, and there we go. Now the particles are bouncing off. It's too much of a bounce as because I want this to be liquid and I don't want it to really bounce too much. So once again, we're going to reduce the bounce to about 0.1. Variation 25. Chaos says what it does. The moment that particle hits the surface, how much chaos do you want to happen? Do you want it to go crazy? Do you want it to bounce off? Do you want it to go... Literally, it will cause chaos if it does. Don't turn that up because it can really get crazy. I want more friction on this floor. So I'm going to set the friction to about 25. Let's see what it does. What friction does is just slows down the particles the moment it hits the surface. It's not slowing it down enough. Bring it up to 50. Too much. But now let's leave it there as it goes because we need to spread this and give this particle a little bit more speed. So now we're going to adjust the particle again. Spread it out. And spread it out. And let's give it a bit more speed. So go to particle generation. I'm going to generate 5,000. Ooh, no wait. Let's go 1,000 for now to be safe. And I'm going to up the speed to 15. And let's see what that plays out like. Play it out, thank you. And I don't want it to die off because I want it to live forever. So instead of it, I'm going to let it stop emitting at 30, but I want the life to be 100. Okay. So then I want all the particles to be on screen. So let it play through. That. Something's putting out that. Whatever it is. Now we need it to be spheres in order for it to actually be considered a fluid dynamic. So we're going to go down. Particle type, sphere. And now I would like to switch it to mesh so we can actually see how big they are. And I want to set it to 100% in the viewport so I can actually see how big they're going to be if maybe I've gone overkill. Let's leave it at that size for now. Right now, you're just getting the movement of the fluid. There we go. And now, what I don't want it to do is you can see it's spinning a lot. So I'm going to kill the spin on these particles. So I'm going to go to my super sprayer and undergo rotation and collision. I'm going to just kill the spin altogether, just to zero it out and see if that actually helped. There we go. Because you don't want the fluid dynamic to follow a spin. It's just going to be weird. So I'm going to leave it right there. You can use metaparticles. I do not recommend it, please. It does the same thing as a blob mesh. Please don't use it. It will crash your machine more often than not. Rather add under your create tab, go to compound objects and add a blob mesh. And then you just have to pick the object you want it to emit from. So you go underneath here and you say I want to pick that one as an object. You can see now it's given you a rough mesh of what it's going to look like. All it's trying to do is follow all these little balls and try to create some sort of fluid dynamic you want. Now we're going to give it more. I'm going to go to 2,500. Just give it a chance to catch a wake up. It's not bad. The playback might be a little bit slow. It's not too bad. Now I want it to go a lot smaller because I don't want it to be that mud-like. So I'm going to decrease the size of it. As you can see now it's getting a little bit smaller, so I'm going to try 2. No, 2 is too small. 3. And now I'm going to include double the amount of particles. Now we're actually getting finer particles. And now I'm going to hide everything else just except for my little particles and see what it's actually doing. Just give it time to catch up because I am clicking it and it's just taking a while to catch up. And now we're going to give it a bit more detail. Tension means how much will it hold to the next particle. So I'm going to set that halfway. So I'm going to set it about 0.5. You can see now there's more. If you set it to 0, there will be a lot more. Or not. What? Okay, don't go lower than 0.1 apparently. But yeah, it just gets less. And the detail in the viewport. what it says, it's rendering coarseness. That means how detailed it is at 3 at render time. So if you look at it in the viewport and I just render it from here, it's a lot more detailed and a lot more softer. It's just because the coarseness on the render is more detailed than viewport for many reasons. Because if I turn this on to 3 now, you just have to wait a while. You can see it's already. If I try to play it back, just give it a bit of chance, and we'll catch up eventually. Might not die, might. Okay, there we go. Now I'm going to put it back to coarseness of 6 because otherwise we're going to be forever. You can see the difference of 6 and 3. So please don't take this as your final end result. Render it. So I'm going to render this frame and you'll see the difference from the viewport display versus oh my god. There we go. That's the difference from the viewport. The viewport is just a guide for movement. The final is a little bit more detailed. Okay. And you can use soft selection to determine coarseness. That means you can have it where it comes out be less detailed to when it hits the floor. And you can have particle flow events. That's the complicated particle flow. But this is all there is to doing fluids in Max. Doing oceans is relatively simpler in Max because it's all it is an animated surface with texture maps on it. Okay. And that is doing simple fluids. You don't really do much of it in. I know Blender can do a very good one, and I generally jump between Blender and RealFlow to do it. I wish they would just include it into Max, but then they wouldn't make money off RealFlow. And that's the reality.